when I was probably about 7 years old. I used to watch American Bandstand and Alan Freed. That's basically when I started getting into music. Most of the other kids were out playing ball or whatever, and I was much more concerned with seeing Eddie Cochran on television. And I was into things like that. And before I could play guitar, I thought I could play. It just seemed like I should play. So I sang with groups pretty young. The first time I was in the studio, I was a guitar player by then, but the first time I was in the studio, I was 15. I was at Columbia Studios doing some...
Really?
Yeah. So
was just singing?
No, I was playing guitar then. Yeah, so...
was this for actual albums or demos? Or?
Yeah, this was for a project that fell through. But, I was doing, 4-track stuff on it. 8-track stuff when I was like 15.
What was the project called?
It was a rock band that, we were going around looking for some support and backing. We found somebody who did work for Columbia. It's so long ago, God, it slips my mind. I couldn't possibly remember. But, so getting back. So I think around the time I was about 13, my parents bought me a guitar. I asked them for one. And I asked them for an electric, of course. Don't bother with an acoustic guitar. And they brought me a $16 Japanese folk guitar with nylon strings.
Right, exactly what you wanted.
Yeah, I just looked at it and I just said, wrong. Yeah. But after I got over the shock of it being an acoustic guitar, I decided to pick it up. And I took first I started taking classical guitar, and it really wasn't what I wanted to do at all. It was much too formal, much too rigid. So I stopped taking lessons for a while, and I took about 3 lessons, folk guitar basically. Back then I was into, I was listening to stuff like the Greenbrier Boys and Pete Seeger and, your early hootenanny stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, I took a few lessons, and at that point, I immediately wanted to start writing my own stuff. If I knew 3 chords, if I knew A, D, and E, there's got to be something you can write. So I started doing that, and the teacher wasn't teaching me quick enough. So once I had the basics, I just decided the rest I would teach myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and then about a year later, I took a couple of months of lessons, and I started doing finger picking and stuff like that, which I've since forgotten. And then I went out and bought an electric guitar. And pretty much primarily the things that influenced me back then were, besides the Beatles and things like that, the things that first really got me were the Byrds, quite a bit, because that was like a synthesis of a lot of different sounds. It was like a melting pot for, the folk element was in there and the electric was in there.
Right.
So I started doing that. And then, with groups like the Yardbirds and stuff like that, I just got much more interested into rhythmic things.
So you listen to Jeff?
Yeah. Between the Yardbirds and the Move, a lot of obscure English bands were primarily the bands that I was listening to. And one of the reasons I started writing was because I couldn't afford import albums. So I figured if I can't get it on record, I'll write my own. Yeah. So I had a Vox 2-pickup guitar that looked like a 2-pickup Stratocaster. And
that was the first electric guitar?
Yeah, that was my first electric. And it had strings that were like piano wire. And I just couldn't figure out how you bend strings like that. How was Jimmy Page doing that? And still in all, I was much more concerned with rhythm.
Were you really?
Yeah, absolutely. I was more intrigued with things that Keith Richards was getting into. I was much more... I think the trouble with a lot of guitar players that are starting now is that they start out trying to play the solo from Communication Breakdown as opposed to learning to play chords. Most of your best guitar players, you have to learn to walk before you can run. And a lot of guitar players now who can play incredibly fast when you say, okay, take the chords and let me play. They just can't hold it together. So I think to be a good lead player, you have to be a good rhythm player. You have to understand music a lot more. So here it is, about 12 years later, and I'm still playing rhythm. I'm playing a lot more lead, but it's almost like lead is something I think you should grow into, not something you should take upon yourself initially.
So then you were involved in like other bands, high school bands, or bands with friends?
Yeah, not many of them, because again, a lot of kids back then were into top 40, and most of the bands in my neighborhood were playing that. So I was content to sit in my room with my twin reverb turned to 10, and pretty much stay in my own little world, with records. And that's pretty much where I got my influences from, was the English stuff. So after I had that Vox, I think I traded that in on a Hagstrom 12-string, because I thought it was time, for the Byrds. And Paul Kantner was playing one, so I got into that, and I stuck with that for quite a while. I was doing a lot of flat picking, and that served its purpose for a long time. And then after that, I got a Les Paul.
Did you?
I got a 60, one of the early SG Les Pauls.
Oh, yeah.
I paid $120 for it. And it was a great little guitar. It was really, really good. And I stuck with that for a while, and then I got a Les Paul TV. And then I just kept switching guitars. Since I couldn't afford to collect them, I wanted that feeling of having variety. Right. So when a guitar was played out, I'd move on to something else.
So you were still writing songs for this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, matter of fact, some of the stuff that wound up on the first album was written when I was about 17.
Really?
Yeah.
Which tracks?
There was a song, Let Me Know, on the first album. And Firehouse was written, I think, when I was in high school. And the whole idea in Firehouse was there was a song the Move had called Fire Brigade.
Right.
And the whole concept of the song was just so great that I decided, that I could get away with that.
So basically you stayed with Gibsons for the most part? Yeah,
really, because I think you find that with a lot of young players, they always want to see what the big stars are using. That's why when Bloomfield and Page and Beck started using a Sunburst Les Paul, all of a sudden you couldn't find one. Right. So Gold Tops went through that too. And so sure, I mean, if you wanted to sound like all those bands, you were supposed to have a Gibson at least. You couldn't be expected to have a Marshall, but a Gibson was a good start. So sure, I think I once owned one Strat, and back then I didn't realize that a Fender and a Gibson are really two different animals. So I think I kept it 2 days. And then it was back to Gibsons.
So what kind of equipment were you using when you first joined KISS?
I had a let me see. When we first got together, Charlie LeBeau in New York.
I know that name.
Yeah. Charlie used to have a shop called Guitar Lab, and he made some wonderful instruments, and he built me a guitar. And I was using an old Twin, which I had made a head for that looked like a Marshall, and I had 2 stacks underneath it. They were Dutch. They were called Marquis, and they looked like Marshalls, but where Marshalls were made out of wood, these things underneath their Tolex cover were fiberboard or something. They were miserable, but they looked great. So I had the Fender head through those, and I kept that guitar, and then it was stolen. That guitar was stolen, and Charlie made me a V, a beautiful V, with one wing that was shorter than the other, and beautiful ebony fingerboard, a lot of abalone, and that too was stolen. And at that point, rather than a lot of heartache, with having beautiful handmade guitars stolen, I started using stock guitars pretty much, and then I started using Gibsons. In the beginning, I was using probably a V, either a V or I used a Les Paul for a while, but it just didn't feel right because in the studio, that's one thing, but on stage back then, I needed a light guitar because I was running around a lot. So, I don't know. I think most players approach stage and recording as two different animals. So, what you may use on stage, you won't necessarily use in the studio.
So then it was a V most of the time then?
Yeah, early, and then I went to, I had a single pickup reverse Firebird, which I used through about 76. I love that guitar. It was a wonderful guitar. And I was in the studio doing Destroyer, I think, our 4th album. And the engineer came in to me and said, he looked like white as a ghost. And he came in and said, come into the studio for a minute. I came in and my guitar was on the floor in 2 pieces. He had knocked it over. And at that point, Gibson made me a replacement, which was really nice. He made me a handmade replacement, but it was never the same. It just wasn't the same. Old wood is old wood.
Right.